All right. So we're just going to get started now. Thank you all for joining day 1 of 3 of ChartChamp. Today's session is going to get kicked off with an opening message from Dustin Cabral, who was the original organizer of the event, which spans back 5 years now, which is great. And then we're going to take it over with Kacper Ksieski, who's going to present a Zero to Snowflake workshop. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dustin. And just as a quick reminder, if you're just joining us, that please make sure to sign up for the Snowflake trial, which will be needed for the hands-on portion of the workshop. And the trial is available on the URL in front of you, as well as in the chat window. Just takes a couple of minutes to get started. And no worries if you haven't had the opportunity to get the trial yet. We've got some precursor slides, so you've got enough time to get set up here. So with that, Dustin, I'll pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Varun. Kacper, if you can unshare, I'm just going to share my screen really quick, do the opening, and then I'll kick it back to you. So let me just share my screen. And let me just move this out of the way so everybody can see. All right, let me present this. And can everybody see my screen? Yes.
I can see it.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so as everyone knows, hopefully this is a 3-day event. Today we're going through Snowflake with Kacper. Then tomorrow we have a double header. So we have Kacper going through Alteryx from 12 to 1 tomorrow. And then from 1 to 2, I'll be talking through Tableau and data visualization as a career. And then on Thursday at 12, we'll be doing our main ChartChamp event. Just as a reminder, everyone who participated in ChartChamp was given a data set about a month ago. We whittled it down to 5 finalists who will be presenting, and those presenters will win first, second, and third place prizes. So we hope that you attend all the events that you can this week. Let's take a quick look at ChartChamp's past. So as Varun mentioned, this is the 5th year of ChartChamp. Our first year was in 2016. Started out small with about 50 people. Then we moved to our Gillette Stadium event, followed up by Fenway. And then last year we had our biggest event yet at Harpoon Brewery. This year our theme is Halloween/horror movie themed. You'll see that in the data and in the dashboards throughout the event over the next 3 days. It's a completely virtual event this year per the environment this year, but hopefully next year we'll get back to a really cool venue. But we've got some really great stuff over the next few days for everyone. And just a reminder, the presentation on Thursday will be giving away our first, second, and third place prizes. And I think that's it for my initial intro. I'm going to kick it back to Kacper so he can get started. And thank you for coming, and hope to see you at all the events this week.
Thank you, Dustin. Dustin, can you see my screen now?
No, it's coming up.
Yep,
That's good to go.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone, to Zero to Snowflake in 90 minutes. Today's presentation is not using horror data, unfortunately. This is prepackaged data with Snowflake, so we're going to have fun with it anyway. My name is Kacper Ksieski. Thank you to Dustin and Varun for queuing me up. I work as a senior consultant for Clear Intelligence, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to join. We have a few slides, and then we're going to do a hands-on workshop. If you want to participate in the workshop, go ahead and sign up for a trial. Just takes a few minutes. If you don't want to participate and you still want to follow along, please feel free to do so. So as we mentioned, you will need a self-service trial account with Snowflake. When you sign up, you'll be given a few options. Go ahead and select an Enterprise Edition option, should be the middle one. And if you're wondering which cloud provider you'll need to select, you can choose any of the options there. They won't have any effect on the lab. Alternatively, you will need to download the lab scripts and that's going to be in the chat in just a moment. And if you want to optionally follow along with the guide that I'll be using, you can download it using the second link, which will be in the chat momentarily as well. All right, the guide is helpful for you if you have a second monitor. No worries either way. I'm going to be walking through the workshop, so you can go ahead and follow me. Okay, look out for those links right now. They're on my screen. They might be a little tough to type, so I've put them into the chat. Next, our agenda. We'll briefly do a partner introduction, then we'll introduce Snowflake, and then we'll get to the fun hands-on lab in which we're going to prepare a lab environment, and that'll only take a few minutes. We'll look at the Snowflake user interface, and then we are actually going to create a database, a table, an external stage, a file format, and we'll understand what some of those mean. And then we're going to create and resize virtual warehouses. We'll also talk through what those mean. And we're going to go and do some other fun stuff. Okay. We are leaving a few minutes at the end for Q&A. Feel free to ask questions now in the chat, and we have moderators who will answer that. They're not limited to general questions. You can ask questions if you get lost or during the lab or anything else. With that, I want to introduce TELLIGENCE. I work for TELLIGENCE, and we are promoting ChartChamp all 3 days. And our expertise is around data. So we're a leading analytics and consulting firm, and we do end-to-end solutions in infrastructure, data warehousing and data engineering, data visualizations, advanced analytics, custom applications, and so on. All right, we have selected best of breed technology partners: Snowflake, Tableau, Data Robot, Alteryx, and that's just to name a few. So as you can see from the slide, our services focus around data, platform visualization, and applications. One thing that I wanted to mention is that about 20% of our company is certified SnowPro. So that's awesome. And you should feel really good about this lab. It's going to be great. I see that in the chat, some people are struggling with some of the links. I'm going to repost those. And let's move on. So now that we've talked about TELLIGENCE, let's talk about Snowflake. And let's talk about the impact of a Snowflake cloud data platform. Now, Snowflake is an SQL data warehouse. It's built for the cloud, and it's meant to solve challenges that traditional data warehouses face. Okay, Snowflake handles all of your data, could be structured or semi-structured, and it takes advantage of the cloud for essentially infinite scalability, and it's easy to learn, it's easy to implement, and it's cost effective. So it has helped companies with their productivity, with scaling, performance, economics, elasticity, concurrency, and so on. It also handles remedial activities like storage allocation, capacity planning, scaling up and down, encryption, backups and upgrades, and these kind of things, so that your DBAs and other teammates can focus on high value activities. Now this is what the architecture looks like. It has 3 different layers that sit on top of a cloud agnostic layer. And by cloud agnostic, we mean that you can choose AWS or Azure or Google Cloud as the provider, and they don't have any effect on Snowflake itself in terms of scaling and performance and things like that. You might want to consider which cloud provider to use, and when you're thinking about where your data is going to be located geographically, and maybe you already have a preferred provider. In any case, Snowflake sits on top of one of these cloud layers, and it itself has these three layers: cloud services, a compute layer, and a data layer. So cloud services, that's fully managed by Snowflake, and that includes your security and authentication, metadata management, optimization, upgrades, and all these kind of things that used to take plenty of planning and large teams to manage on your side. Snowflake takes care of all that for you. Then you have a compute layer, and the compute layer comprises these MPP machines that Snowflake calls virtual warehouses. These virtual warehouses are what do all of the querying and data loading for you. And then finally, you have the data layer, that centralized storage. And the centralized storage is located, again, in one of these cloud providers. And these two facets of Snowflake, the compute and the storage, they are splintered. So you pay for storage and you pay for compute. Now, that means that you can scale up and down as much as you want and do it instantaneously because you are not provisioning machines in the cloud or on-premise and thinking about how many resources you have to do to have in order to give people concurrency and performance and so on. So all of this leads to faster and better decision making in the cloud. And finally, I have a little slide here on functional architecture. So in the middle, we have our storage layer, and then we're loading some semi-structured and structured data using an XS, or an extra small compute machine, a compute cluster. And then somebody else is using a small machine, a small virtual warehouse for data transformation. And data's coming in and out. Then you have a read-only virtual warehouse, this finance app, and that's large. The finance applications need to query their data rapidly and ingest it. And then you have another large machine, another large virtual warehouse, which the data scientists are using. And the data is going, in between them. And that's not affecting the finance app. It's not affecting the data transformation, querying or anything like that. And you can add this other machine, this other medium virtual warehouse of marketing, analytics, reporting, BI, and so on. And all of these different virtual warehouses, they don't share anything. It's called shared nothing architecture. And that way they don't have any concurrency issues. If you bring one of these down, it doesn't affect the others. And yet they have a shared disk architecture to get to the data. The data is available to all of these different virtual warehouses. Of course, there is a full permissions model, so you can select which users and which virtual machines can access which data and so on. For the purposes of this slide, all of these different machines can reach the data. All right, without too much exposition, we've gone through a couple of slides and we've given everybody enough time to get their trials of Snowflake and also download the SQL script. So with that, I'd love to switch over to the lab portion of the demo. Okay. Now I'm gonna just log out and go back to the login screen. So we should all...
Sorry to interrupt. For those who are having trouble with the lab scripts, I'm about to email it out to everyone. So you'll have it available in your email in just a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you, Varun. Yeah, I'm looking in the chat and we have various attendees from different organizations, and either Snowflake or the scripts are being blocked. due to corporate firewalls and so on. So Varun, thank you for that. Just look out for your email in a few moments. For everybody else, we can still continue. My pace is going to be slow enough so that will allow everybody to wait for the email and download everything, and yet fast enough that it'll be interesting. So I'm on my login screen, and I'll just log into Snowflake. Optionally, I could set up two-factor authentication, which I typically do, and it's not needed for this demo. Now, as you can see, I'm logging into Snowflake using my browser. There's nothing here to install. Everything is in the cloud, and everything is managed by Snowflake. Now, I've logged in, and I'm going to give everybody a tour of what we see in the UI so that we can follow along in the lab. Now, if you've logged in and you get some kind of welcome boxes or tutorials or anything like that, you can feel free to close those and maybe take a look at them later on. For now, we don't need them. And we're going to go ahead and get started with becoming acquainted with our UI. Now at the top, we see a databases button. If we click that, we see a list of all of the databases that are available to us. And we're going to go ahead and create some databases later on in the lab. This is just where we can see them and interact with them. And if I click on a database, then it takes me to a lower view, in which case I can see tables, I can see views, and other aspects of this database. Then I have shares. Now, sharing is a fantastic concept in Snowflake, and we're going to cover that in the lab. Essentially, what we can do is we can consume data that others have shared with us, and we don't have to pay for the storage costs, or we can host data and share it with other people, and similarly, they don't have to pay for the storage costs. Then we have up here Data Marketplace, and this is how we can add in third-party data from other providers. So I have that on a different screen, different window. And we have things like S&P Global Market Intelligence and FactSet and all of these different options down here. We can also look through the different categories of data that we want to ingest into our analytics process. So this is pretty wonderful that it is integrated directly into the Snowflake UI. Moving on, we have our Warehouses tab. I briefly talked about virtual warehouses in the compute layer. So these are the brains of Snowflake. This is how we can load data, how we can query it, and get all of our analyses done. And if you're clicking through and you're on the same Warehouses tab that I am, you probably have this compute WH warehouse set up as part of the demo, and it's likely an extra small. An extra small is just the number of machines that are in this warehouse. You can resize this as much as you want and as rapidly as you want, and we can also create more warehouses for different purposes. And they are set up in t-shirt sizes. So we can say, yes, we want an extra small or small, medium, large, and so on. That brings us up here to worksheets. And the worksheets are how we can use queries to manipulate our data and create structures. So basically do DML and DDL operations. And we're going to be using this Worksheets tab heavily. Finally, we have a History tab. we can see a history of all of the different queries that we've executed. And with an amazing feature of Snowflake, we can actually go and look at the data the way it was before we executed that query or directly after and so on. And that way we avoid some of the goofs where we do these weird update statements and then we have to struggle to find backups. Now, we're going to go back to our worksheets tab. And on the left, we have our database objects. So this is probably familiar to anybody who's used a database before. This is just our tree. And you might have a view like this, in which case you don't see any of that on the left sidebar. And you can just hit these double arrows to expand that. On the upper right of the worksheet, we see a context. I'm a sysadmin, and I'm using this compute warehouse, and I don't have a database or schema selected yet. So if I write a query here and execute it, we won't know what it's going to execute against. And we're going to play around with that in the lab as well. Okay, now let's talk about the story here. Our story is that we are working for City Bike, and this is a real citywide bike share system in New York City. And our team wants to run some analytics on the data. We want to better understand the riders and how we can serve them. We also want to relate some weather data to see the impact of the weather on ridership. In order to accomplish those tasks and answer those business questions, really, we're going to need to start by loading some data. Right now we have no data, and we have to take care of that first. So we'll start by loading a structured CSV file that has been provided by City Bike. Then we're going to load some semi-structured and open source weather data that's in a JSON format. We're going to correlate those two to see how weather impacts the number of bike rides. In order to do those things, we have to first create a database. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Databases tab here. Okay, and I'm just going a little bit slowly now to make sure everybody can follow along, and we'll speed it up in a few moments. And let's do a create here. So we want to create a new database. Now let's call this database City Bike. I'm using all caps. It doesn't matter if you do or don't, it's irrelevant. So if you just want to follow along perfectly, let's do all caps City Bike and click finish. And we have to make sure that we put in City Bike, we don't use a Y. Okay, now that we've created the database, we have to create a table to store some kind of information. All right, we have some queries that have been pre-built. So let's go ahead to our worksheet and load them now. So I'm on my worksheet tab. Okay, let's everybody go ahead and locate that area. And we want to click on, hello? Sorry, I'm just getting a little background noise here. Sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. I was getting a lot of feedback in my headphones. I just had to turn them off and on for a second. Okay, So we are on our worksheet tab here, and we have a little down arrow all the way to the right here. When we hover over, it says Open Existing Worksheets or Tutorials. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and click on Load Script. And we want to navigate to our SQL file that we downloaded. So go ahead and take a moment now to navigate in your Windows Explorer browser here, this dialog box, to that SQL file that we downloaded. And it's in the chat. I'm going to paste the link one more time. So it's that lab scripts link. Just takes a few moments. It's a very small file. And notice that I'm not opening the file directly in a notepad editor or anything like that. I'm just loading it here from our Snowflake UI. Once I do that, it loads up the entire script for me. And this way we don't have to create our own queries and we don't have to struggle typing anything out. So we have a database. And notice that in my context up here, I'm now in that database, City Bike, and in the public schema. Okay, I am going to place my cursor in this first query here. Notice that there is a semicolon. So anything that's preceding the semicolon is part of one query. And I'm just going to place my cursor in there and click Run. Okay, you should have this status message, table trips successfully created. Alternatively, you can also highlight the query itself and run it. Now I should get an error because that table already exists, or no, sorry, create or replace. So I didn't get an error, that's fine. And notice that when I selected this, I got a dialog box here asking me, are you sure that you want to run the following queries? And I clicked run and that was okay. Now, I ran this statement and I created a table and I didn't have a virtual warehouse running. Right? None of us have a warehouse running yet. We haven't started it. So this tells us that Snowflake actually lets us run DDL operations without any kind of compute power. So we don't have to pay to create tables and databases and drop them and so on. And that's extremely useful. Okay, now let's go to our next query here. List at city bike trips. So let's run that and see what happens. Okay, so we're getting an error here that our stage does not exist. That's fine. We're going to go ahead and create that now. So at the top of our screen, let's go over to databases again. Okay, notice that we're just flipping back and forth so we can establish comfort with going back to databases and our worksheets and so on. Okay, so let's locate our City Bike database and click on it here. Now, we see that we have a table called trips, and that's what we made earlier. So that's awesome. If we want to, we can click on that and verify that it has the columns and data types that we wrote in our query or that we executed in the pre-built query. And we can see those there. And now before we can do anything else, we need to make a stage. So when we're working with structured data and it's already in some kind of public bucket, for example, an S3 bucket, we can just stage it and have that data ingested into our table. So now let's go ahead and click Stages over here. Let's create. In this example, our data, our City Bike data, is in an S3 bucket. So I'll go ahead and click on this selection. Notice that this has nothing to do with the cloud provider that we selected when we created our trial. All right. If we are on Azure, we can get data from S3 or Azure or GCP or somewhere else. That doesn't matter. So now that we've selected S3, go ahead and click Next. And here we have to type in a name. Let's go ahead and, sorry, that's a schema name. Let's go ahead and type trips. And then we have to type a URL. Okay. Oh, sorry, my name is City Bike Trips. We have to type in a URL here for S3. All right, instead of trying to follow from my screen, I also have that link for the stage location, and I'm going to paste that into the chat. So that's the link for the S3 bucket that has our data. Okay, I'll give everybody a moment.
I'll jump in real quick. When you send some stuff, just send it to all panelists and attendees.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. I've been copying it over and continuing through, but just
thank you.
No problem.
All righty. So we have that S3 location link in the chat and paste it here into the URL. Now, typically, data is not public, especially when you're dealing with privileged data. So you'd need an AWS key and a seeker key and things like that, potentially even like an encryption key. Our data here is public, so we don't need those things. Just be aware that when you're ingesting data from some kind of external location, you probably will need those authentication keys. So we just have these 3 bits of information. We're putting this into the public schema. That's the only schema we have. We're calling it City Bike Trips. And we have our S3 bucket here. So now we click Finish. And we have our stage set up. Now let's go back to warehouses, worksheets. And let's execute this list at City Bike Trips query that failed for us before. And now it runs. And what is it doing? It's telling us about these files that are in this S3 bucket. It's listing all of the available files. Before we can ingest them, now that we've created this connection between our database and this external stage, we have to tell Snowflake what these data look like. So let's head back to databases here. Let's go to file formats. Let's create one. All right, let's give it a name like CSV. And under field optionally enclosed by down here, let's select double quote. That's what our data look like. Let's scroll down here. I see a box that has error on column count mismatch with a check. I'm going to uncheck that. And then above it, null string. I'm going to blank that out. So I made 4 changes here. I gave it a CSV name. 3 changes. I removed this error on column count mismatch, and then I blanked out this null string. No, 4, sorry. And then changed this field optionally enclosed by to double quotes. Okay, so when you're done, it should look like what I have on my screen. And then you can go ahead and click Finish. Now we're ready to load data. We have an external share. We have our database and our table set up to accept that. We've told Snowflake what the data look like. So let's go ahead. Now we can click on warehouses, and we have our compute warehouse here. And we're going to use this one. So let's select it so it's highlighted, and let's go ahead and click configure. Now notice at the top you see a size. So extra small is 1 credit per hour. If we click that drop down, we can see these t-shirt sizes, and we see how many credits they use per hour. I'm going to leave it on extra small, and I'll keep all of the other options here as is. If you didn't select an enterprise edition for the trial, your dialog box might look a little bit different. You may not have the cluster option here, and that's okay. We don't really need that. We are actually going to change this from an extra small to a small. And then we'll click finish here. And notice that the status is still on suspended. So it's not running, it's not incurring any kind of cost. Let's go to worksheets. And let's scroll down here a little bit. Now our next query is a copy into statement. So it's copying into trips. Trips is our table from this city bike share. And we're saying we're going to use this file format CSV. That's what we created just now. Let's go ahead and run that. Now, as we said, we're in the correct context. We're using that compute warehouse in city bike in the public schema. And our query is executing. So it's taking a few seconds. And there is a little green light next to our compute virtual warehouse up here in the context. So our warehouse was suspended before. Now it's actually running. And we need that in order to load the data. And for me, it took 27 seconds. It might take a few, or give or take a few seconds on your side to load the data. And we see a status. So we've loaded all of these different files into our table. Okay, now that we've done this, let's look over here in the results window. In the upper right-hand corner, we see open history. Now we see that with a little arrow. So let's click it. And we can resize this window a little bit more. And we see the copy statement that we just ran. All right, let's see, can we resize this a little bit to see how many rows we loaded? Okay, so unfortunately I can't see that. It took 27 seconds. All right, let's play around with the size of the virtual warehouse and see how long it's going to take if we resize it. So first thing I want to do is just truncate the table. I want to remove all the data that we just loaded. So I'm placing my cursor here in the truncate table trips statement. And I'm going to go ahead and click run. It told me that that statement executed successfully. Okay, so that was fast. Now let's go to the context up here. And instead of going to the warehouse, we can resize directly from our context. We have our compute warehouse, it's on small. We can click resize here. Let's go ahead and select large. We loaded our data using small, and that was 2 credits per hour. Let's do a large one. Notice it took a moment to resize, and now it's on large. Look in our context. And let's execute this statement. It's the same as the one above. We're just doing it sequentially. Now let's run that and see how long it takes. So this is a much bigger virtual warehouse. we expect that the load will take fewer seconds. All right, so we can go back to our history here. And we see the earlier one with the size small warehouse took 27 seconds. And the one that we just ran in history took 10 seconds. So much, much faster to do the same job. And that's one of the powers here of Snowflake, is that we can resize our warehouse at will. If we know jobs are going to take a long time, we can just scale up the warehouse so that they don't take that long. And now we have our large warehouse. We used it to load our data. And now we've seen a couple of different ways in previous exercises to resize our warehouse. Okay, we can always go back here to the warehouse list and select this one and reconfigure it if we want to. So I'll just go ahead and click cancel. I'll go back to my worksheet. Now we've loaded the data. Let's take a look at what we have, what we've loaded. Now I'm in my worksheet. I'm making sure my context is still City Bike and public, and I'm using this compute warehouse, and it's a large one. And I'm going to locate this select star statement. Select star from trips, limit 20. And I'll execute that. And now I see all of my data. I see some trip duration, a start and stop time, where the location of the start and of the end. I see some coordinates and other interesting information. Now let's take a look at, now that we've seen these raw data, let's do a little bit of aggregation. We want to figure out some kind of average duration of these bike rides, of usage. So we have another query written for us, and you can see that it's just going to look at the date and the number of trips and look at average duration and distance. So let's run that. And we can see that on 2013, June 1st, we had 152 trips of an average duration of 56 minutes over 2.12 kilometers. Now, this query only took 2 seconds. That's pretty rapid. Let's keep going. Now, if we know that we don't need a query to take 2 seconds, if it can be a little slower, so we can optimize our compute costs, we can resize our warehouse and make it a little bit smaller so that the query will come back a little bit slower, and that would still be okay for our needs. Conversely, if we need this to come back way faster than 2 seconds, for whatever reason, we can resize our warehouse in the opposite direction and make it much bigger so that the query takes a sub-second. Okay, now what I wanted to do is, we see the exact same query duplicated. Let's run the second one. And we see that it came back in 677 milliseconds. That's even faster than the prior one. If we compare these two queries, they're exactly the same. Now, why did it take 2 seconds the first time and a sub-second the second time? Well, there is something in Snowflake called a result cache. And that holds the result of every query that's been executed in the past 24 hours. And what's great is it's available across warehouses. So if I'm running this and my counterpart is running a different virtual warehouse and he wants to execute the same query, he's going to be able to leverage the fact that I've already run this. It's the exact same query. The underlying data haven't changed. and the data's cached. So it comes back much faster. And we can go back to our history and see that. The 2.46 seconds versus the 677 seconds. Now, if I further expand this a little bit, we can see the prior result has a byte scanned info, a little chart here. And it says that it scans from local and remote and so on. And I don't see that on the most recent entry. It's because the data are cached. Snowflake didn't have to go back and rescan the data. It already had the results available and it served it up to us. That's how I was able to do it so quickly. So now that we've done that and we've seen the caching ability, let's keep going on. Okay, we have another query here, and we want to know for each day of the week, how many trips are being taken? Let's go ahead and run that. That took a few seconds. And I see that Wednesday is my busiest day with 9,760,000 trips. And Sunday looks like it's the slowest day. Okay, so in just a matter of moments, we've been able to run a few queries on a large data set that minutes before that wasn't even in our table. So up to this point, we have understood how to quickly create a database and a table, and then have some data that's in an external provider, stage it and load it into our storage layer. And then we've played around with the sizes of the virtual warehouse to look at speed. And we've also seen a results cache. So these are just some of the powerful features of Snowflake. And it's pretty fast to do all of these things. All right, we're all newbies to the environment, to the UI, and we've been able to do this so far. Okay, from here, I want to talk about a concept called cloning. Snowflake has this notion of a zero copy clone, which will clone a table or schema and database in seconds. It's basically a snapshot of data in the source object, and it's made available, and it's it's readable and writable, and it's independent of the original source. So if we wanted to, we could take our table and clone it and make changes to it without affecting the prior one. Or we can use that if we've made some kind of weird changes, we can go back in time and get a clone of the data before we made some updates. So we're going to play around with these concepts now so we can see just how easy it is to do them. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that here. I'm going to create a table, and I'll call it trips dev, and I'm going to clone the trips table. And that's already written for me, and I'm going to run that. Now that I have this, I can share it with anybody, and I don't have to worry about my version of the data being changed out from underneath me, because I have mine. I have my original table, my trips table, and then I have this trips dev table that other people can manipulate. Now, for those of you who are used to multiple environments in your database, where you have production, dev, stage, simu, whatever, this should be triggering this notion for you that it's this easy to take production data and then make a dev copy of it and give it to other people and let them manipulate it while keeping the source or production data read-only and unchangeable by them. And this is just how easy it is. Now we just cloned one table. We can clone schemas and databases just as easily as we did here. And if we want to see that, on our left sidebar, we have our city bike database, and we have our public schema. So if we click that, we see trips and trips dev. And when we hover over, we can see that they have the equivalent size and number of rows, 61 million. Now, all of this has been serving our need to do analysis. We've loaded our structured data, our bike data, and we've executed a few queries against the bike data to understand, which days of the week are busiest and so on. Ultimately, what we want to do is relate our bike data to weather data and go from there. So we've done the structured data. Let's get the semi-structured data in here. So what I wanted us to do is to create a database called weather. Now, earlier when we made a database, we actually went to the databases tab and used the UI to do that. Here we have a query. Anything that you want to do in the UI can also be scripted. So you don't have to point and click. You can just script everything. So at this point, let's go ahead and execute the create database weather statement. And that should just take a moment. And it lets us know that it was successful. Now that we've done that, we have to switch our context if it hasn't been switched already. So we just click here and we're in database weather in the public schema. That's good. Instead of clicking up here, we can always run a series of statements to set our context. So as I mentioned, anything that you can do in the UI, you can script. So I'll highlight all 4 of these because I want to do the entire context in one shot. It asks me, do I want to run the following queries? I could make this dialog box go away and just say, don't ask me again. I'll keep it on just for safety. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. So now if we changed something up here, if we were still in City Bike in a public schema, we can just run this and reset our context to what we need. Notice that it changes back. Next thing that we want to do is we want to create a table that's going to store our JSON weather, our weather data that's in a JSON format. And Snowflake has this special data type. It's called a variant. And a variant can hold any kind of unstructured data. Okay, it's this catch-all that we're going to use for this. So let's go ahead and run this statement. And we see that we've successfully created that table. Okay, no surprise there. And we need to stage our data, just like we did with the City Bike. Well, as I mentioned, we could go to databases and create it in the UI, or we can just use the script here. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to create our stage using this S3 bucket. And it's been created for us. Okay, now, just like last time, we wanted to list what the contents of the stage. Let's go ahead and do that. Now we can see all of the different files in there, and we can see when they were last modified and so on. I can just resize this to see the names of these files. Notice that they are JSON files in a gzip format. So from here, we are going to load our data. And we haven't created a file format. We can just use a generic one for JSON here. and we click on Run. It only took a few seconds. We're using a large warehouse, so we didn't have to wait long. We loaded 61 files. Okay, I'm going to pause here just to give everybody a second to catch up. So the last thing that we did was to load all of those JSON weather data files into our database. Okay, feel like everybody's caught up. And let's do a select statement. Let's see what we loaded. Okay, we can clearly see these are JSON data in our V column. That's our variant column. And I see some special characters down here. Okay, so this is just holding everything. Now, we need a way to unwind these data so that we can use them in our analytics process. Okay, so from here, we're going to create a view. Now this, generally a view is just a specialized query that we don't want to run over and over. So we just create a view which looks like a table to other people. They don't know that underneath it's not storing anything. And in our view, we're going to use dot notation to traverse the JSON structure here in Snowflake. And we wouldn't want to run this every time, like write this and run it. We just want to store it in a view. So let's go ahead and run this without explaining it any further. And, as I mentioned, it's just going to traverse the hierarchy of the JSON and turn it into a table for us. So let's go ahead and query the view we just made. And now it's in a tabular format. And this looks drastically different than that semi-structured data we had. Now we can use this just like any other table, and we can put it into our analytics process very easily. On the left side here, let's just refresh. We should see weather. So that's the database we made. Okay, if you don't see it on your left sidebar, just hit that little refresh button. And we click on public, and we can see that we have a JSON weather data table, and we have a view. The view is the one we just made and we just queried. Now that we've done all of this, we've loaded our weather data, we've loaded our city bike data, I think it's time to get to the point here, and that is to draw a conclusion between these two tables and these two data sets. So we have our trips data, we have our weather data, we have a nice little query that's been written for us. Let's go ahead and run that. Let's look at our results. So clear is the first type of condition, and it has the most trips. That makes sense. Next is clouds, rain, snow, and we can see as the weather gets, a little trickier, fewer people are taking bike rides. And that conforms with what our intuition is. So we expect that when it's clear, people want to be outside and they want to take bike rides versus when it's a thunderstorm or there's haze out. So now that we've done that, we've really accomplished the main part of the lab. And we have a few more things that we want to do to show off some of the features. We should all feel pretty good and accomplished about this. We took data from external sources, both structured and semi-structured, and we loaded them into our UI, into our database using the UI. And we did that both with, point and click and also with SQL. And then we drew some kind of conclusion by doing a join. So that's pretty good for people who haven't touched Snowflake or probably even have seen it before. So we should feel pretty good about that. And now let's just continue on looking at other capabilities of Snowflake. The next one that we want to talk about is time travel. So I briefly talked about it here and there. Time travel is Snowflake's capability to access historical data at any point in time. And that's configurable. So the default period is 24 hours. With Snowflake Enterprise, it can be up to 90 days. And this is something that is pretty unique. Other databases don't have this functionality. So not only does Snowflake have it, they make it very easy for us. Now, when would we want to use time travel to, restore historical data or enable it? Well, it could be that we accidentally or intentionally deleted something, and then we have to undo that. We have to get it back. We want to maybe duplicate or back up data from some points in the past. Or maybe we want to analyze something over specified periods of time. So let's take an easy and common example. We drop a table. So that's the statement right here, drop table JSON weather data. And let's go ahead and click run. And at this moment, we're getting that sinking feeling like, oops, we should not have dropped this table. Well, in a traditional database, we'd be scrambling. We'd try to go through the logs and we'd see if we have a backup, and it would be stressful. Even if we could get our data back, this is unneeded stress. So let's run a query here, see if we can select from the table. No, doesn't exist or not authorized. Okay, normally we would be in big trouble. Here, we can just undrop the table. So I'll go ahead and do that. And it tells us it's been successfully restored. Okay, I'm just going to run a query one more time. My data's there. Whew. So it's just that easy. We drop the table, we can undrop it. And we're going to see a few other fun options of how we can use time travel. So let's change our context, and we're going to go back to the City Bike database. So I'll just select these 4 statements so we can change our context in one shot. And I'm going to go ahead and click run. Notice up here our context changes to City Bike. And we're going to run an update statement. This has happened to many of us, I'm sure, where we write an update statement and it's not quite done. So here we're setting a start station name to be oops, and there's no where clause or anything. This is just operating over this entire trips table. Let's go ahead and run that. So we've updated 61 million records, and all of them have a station as oops. Now let's take a look. Let's run this next select statement so we can see the number of rides for each start station. And all of them are in oops, right? This again would be a type of crisis, and we'd be scrambling to come back to restore our data before this update statement, right? I've been there. I think many of us have been there. Well, what we can do is we can look through our history here, and we know that we ran an update statement. So we can actually use that programmatically. We can tell Snowflake to find that update statement in the history and get the query ID and undo that. So let's go ahead and click run. Okay, so statement successfully executed successfully. Okay, so it's loading that query ID into a statement. And now we have our next statement, which is going to basically drop and recreate that table with a select star from trips before that ID. So what we're doing is we're getting rid of the current data, which is all bad, it's all oops, and we are replacing it with the data we had right before we ran that statement. Let's go ahead and do that. It'll just take a few seconds. Okay, Snowflake is telling us that it was successfully created. Let's run our query again to see if we've undone it. Yeah, so I can see that these are actual stations. There's no oops here. So we've undone this really crazy update statement. And it wasn't very tough. All we had to do is just run a couple of queries right after. They didn't take long. And while we could dig through our history here and find the query ID and copy and paste it, we just had Snowflake do it for us. We said, go back in our history and find that update statement and give us the data right before we ran it. Quite easy. Again, this is all meant to avoid these crises that happen frequently when we drop a table or we run a bad statement or whatever the case is. We don't have to scramble looking for backups and these kind of things. So we're doing pretty well on time. I feel that I'm going slowly enough so that people can follow along, and people are asking questions. Thank you to Jeff for fielding them. And let's keep going on. Now what I want to do is talk about role-based access controls. Now, role-based access controls are just these kind of powerful and granular abilities for a specific role or user to see what that person can access, to determine what that person can access and what kind of level this person has. This whole time we've been using sysadmin, which is the default here. So let's switch it up a little bit. All right, I'm going to run this statement to change my role to an account admin. And we can see in the context that it has been changed. I'm now an account admin only in the context. Notice all the way in the top right under my username, I'm still logged in as a sysadmin. I can change that, and we'll look at that later. It's just that in the context of this worksheet, in these series of queries, I'm an account admin. So from here, I have the abilities to create new roles or delete them, grant roles different kind of access and things like that. So I'll run this first statement here, this create role junior DBA. Okay, it successfully created it for me. And now, why don't I change my context to junior DBA? Sorry, I skipped a step. I apologize. I need to grant my role access to something. So here, the next statement, grant role, I'm just going to replace this portion here. Your username goes here, and I'll actually type in my username. Let's do it all in caps. Why not? So go ahead and do that yourself. just find your username in the upper right-hand corner and type that in. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click run. And now I've granted that role to myself. And now I should be able to change my context to a junior DBA here. Yes, there we go. Now that I've done that, I see in my context I don't have any warehouses, databases, or schemas available. So the databases, I don't have what we created. I don't have the city bike or the weather database. I have these others. And we're not going to be using those during the lab. All right, so where did they go? Well, I don't have access to them as a junior DBA. I wasn't granted any permissions. So what I need to do is I need to go back to being an account admin so I can change permissions for this different role here. Notice that city, bike, and weather come right back into my Object Explorer on the left side, that little tree. And I have a couple of grant statements here. I can grant usage on database city, bike, and weather to this junior DBA role. I'll execute both in one shot. And now let's change our context again to the junior DBA role. And in my context, I do have city bike and I do have weather. Okay, now if I want to continue to query these databases, I'd need to have access to a virtual warehouse. And that's okay, we don't need to do that right now. This is just an exercise to show how we can change and add and grant usage to different roles. Now, in the upper right-hand corner, I see my username and I see that I'm logged in as a sysadmin, and that hasn't changed no matter what context I've had here in my worksheet. So I've been a sysadmin, I've been an account admin, and so on. What I want to do is I want to, up here, change my role. So I'll go ahead and find the switch role option, and I'm going to select account admin. Now it's changing the entire UI for us because an account admin can see things that a sysadmin cannot. Now notice at the top, we have account here. We didn't have that before. And if you're not sure, you can always just switch your role back to a sysadmin, check it, and then come back here. So in any case, we didn't have account before. And I'm going to go ahead and click on account. Now, when we click account, at the top we see usage, and that's what we've highlighted. And we have some information here from Snowflake. This is an actual share from Snowflake that's telling us that we have, these many warehouses, these many credits used. Here's the size of our data that's stored. And here is how we've used our credits. I can look over certain dates and say, oh, I've used this many this day, and so on. Today's the 27th, I've used 4 credits. If we want to, we can go through some of these other tabs to understand more information about how we're being charged in terms of billing and users and roles and things like that. We're going to skip over that for a second. We have our usage information, and I said that this is coming directly from Snowflake. Well, this is a great time to talk about shares. So as I mentioned, data sharing is where we can host data and let other people use it, or somebody else can host data and let us use it. And it's not a double dipping in terms of data storage costs. One person is hosting it and paying for it, and multiple people are just utilizing it. So that's what data sharing is. And Snowflake is data sharing their account data with us, and this is specific to us. And that's how we see this view here. And we call the viewers, so in this case, we're viewing these data, we're called the consumers of the data, and they can be maybe different business units inside of your organization. So we're all using Snowflake, but we only want to share certain things with other business units, or they could just be external. The shared data, they're always live and real time, and we can establish more fine-grained access or revoke access completely. Okay, we don't have to send across CSVs zipped in some kind of FTP or anything like that. It's very easy to do this. So let's go ahead and go back to our database tab. And we're going to actually look at the shares. So we're still in an account admin role. And we see Snowflake sample data. So I click that. And I see all of these different tables that have been shared. Okay, I can also click up here to shares. And I see inbound versus outbound. Inbound is what's being shared with us. That was the sample data table or database that we just viewed. And we also have this account usage share. So that's coming from Snowflake. And that's how we know how much we're paying in credits and things like that. So in this case, we are the consumers of these data. Next, what I want us to do is create an outbound share. Let's go ahead and click on outbound here, and let's share the city bike data. So let's go ahead and select this create button, and we want to give it some kind of name here. And we can call it trips_share. All right, for databases, we have to say we're sharing the city bike database. And if we wanted to, we can just create this as is and share the entire database. Let's be a little bit more targeted, and under tables and views, let's navigate this tree and find trips and click the blue apply button. And notice that it looks like we have an option to select more than just one table. And of course we can do that. We can select multiple tables and views in our database. I'm just going to select that one. Okay, from here, I'm ready to click create. And it's been successfully shared. Now, normally we'd want to add some consumers here. Notice the blue add consumers button. So we have to tell Snowflake with whom to share these trips data. That's not important for now. We can just click done. And that is a little walkthrough of the shares. So in this lab, we have gone through our databases tab up here. And we've seen how we can create a new database. We've seen how we can create within a database a stage or a file format. We've made tables programmatically using a query. We've gone up here to shares and understood how data are being shared with us and how we can share data with other people. We briefly talked about the data marketplace, very briefly. We've gone here into this warehouses tab, and we've seen this compute warehouse. We've resized it and we've played around with it. We've been in our worksheets tab for most of the time. And we have run these pre-scripted queries. We've gone through our history of different queries that we've executed. And we've seen this in a little side menu or sidebar in our worksheets tab. Here is a different view so we can see everything. And we've even used this programmatically to undo a bad update statement. We've gone through our account and we've loaded different types of data and combined, basically joined them to get insights in meaningful ways. So what are the next steps from here? We have some statements that we've included in case you want to delete all the shares and drop all the databases and everything. So essentially, this is going to reset your lab environment to the beginning. So if you want to replay this and do it from scratch, you can just by running these statements. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll rerun my context, change it, make sure that I am an account admin. And then I can drop the share that I created as an account admin and then drop all of these other objects. So I'll leave them undropped just for a moment in case there are questions and we want to have everything there. But that's why these statements are here. So you can reset the lab and keep playing around. So during this lab, we've given you an introduction into how to navigate the UI, how to run these statements, and we've seen that you can do everything either in the UI or using a statement. And we've seen some of the more powerful features of Snowflake, using the zero copy cloning, using time travel to undo errors, sharing data, loading semi-structured and querying it rapidly. So we really encourage you to use the rest of your free trial. You don't need a credit card or anything like that. Just keep going. You have, I think, 400 credits, and we've used less than 10 during this hands-on lab. So keep going. Get some of your own sample data, create your own table, load it, play around, and keep playing around with some of these features that we've looked at, just to get more of a feel of how you can use Snowflake for your specific use case. Okay, so let's go back to PowerPoint. Now, Snowflake has been proven by thousands of customers already, and here are just some of the different customers. And if you look at the names, they're reaching across all of the different industries, CPG and fintech, finance, pharma and everything is here. So again, let's recap what we talked about, what we accomplished. We now know how to navigate the UI. We can create different objects. We can load and query data. Okay, don't worry about multi-clustering, that's not applicable. We know how to undo user errors, and we know about role-based user control, access control. We know about sharing and so on. And I just want to acknowledge some of the people that have helped with this, with ChartChamp and with Zero to Snowflake. So thank you to Varun and Dustin. So they were the MCs at the beginning. Thank you to Kendra, Chitra, Jeff, and Jean-Noir. So Jeff was fielding all of the questions for me. I greatly appreciate that. It's tough to look at my screen and then another one for the chat. So And I want to thank everybody on the call, all of the participants. For questions, go ahead and contact us, clearintelligence.com/contact. And now we have time for a Q&A. So I want to open it up to
Just wanted to thank Kacper for pulling this together and also for doing our Alteryx session tomorrow. And just a reminder, we have Alteryx and Tableau career presentation tomorrow and our main chart champ finalist presentation on Thursday. So hope you can all join for that, and I'll leave it to you, Kacper, for the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Dustin. I appreciate that. Jeff, did we see any questions in the chat that you think are valuable for us to talk through?
No, not particularly. Just kind of some high-level overview ones at the beginning with how much knowledge is needed, and then just more access issues along the way, but nothing concrete that got added in here.
Okay. So, Varun, do we have to unmute a participant to ask a question or an attendee? If you're attending and you have questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat. They don't have to be specifically on the lab. You can ask theoretical questions on Snowflake itself as a platform or on ClearIntelligence as a partner. Okay, we're getting some comments. Varun, do you want me to kick it over to you?
I don't know if Varun is might
Okay.
not be working, but Jim Cody said that the Snowflake database can be accessed by Tableau Desktop, ? The answer to that is yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Snowflake database is treated just like any other database in that you can use any kind of BI platform to access it. So if you have Tableau and you want to use Snowflake as a data source, Tableau connects to Snowflake natively, just like any other platform. You know, Snowflake is a powerhouse, and every major BI platform has a connector for Snowflake. So it's native, it's simple, it looks and feels just like any other database connection. So great question. I see another one. What's the best way to share a query that we write in Snowflake with a coworker? That's a great question. I suppose it depends on the nature of the query. If the query itself is, a query that you're using to select from tables or something like that, I feel like the best way is to create a view and then share that view with your coworker. So if your query looks something like, let's scroll up here. We had something like this. So we have this query, and we don't want to copy and paste it and send it to somebody. We just want to create a view out of it, and then we give our coworker permissions to view that. And
just to expand on that, once you create the view, you can actually open it up and see the underlying SQL within it, so your coworker could also grab the SQL that way.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. So that applies if your query is like analytical in nature, that it's pulling data from something. If the query that you wrote is different, where it's some kind of DDL operation, or it's let's find where we did a time travel, or we're undropping something, or I don't know, we're finding the I don't know, we're creating some kind of role or doing something like this, then I suppose that you just have to share that script with somebody the traditional way. which is like, sending them an email or with an SQL file or something like that. Okay, so just to recap on the question, if it's a query where we're doing some kind of select or who knows, we can wrap that in a view. If it's something else, then just share it normally, like in an email or something like that. So great question, and Jeff, thank you for the assist. So it looks like all of our questions have been answered. Dustin, do you want to recap with any final thoughts and instructions
We're getting some more pouring in there.
Oh, we are? Sorry, I can't see any others coming in.
They're in the Q&A. Can Tableau Prep also create a new table in Snowflake using the new Prep version?
Ooh, that, I think, Dustin, can you answer that one?
I actually don't know if we can create a new table with the latest version of Snowflake. I'm gonna follow up on that, and then I'll reply back out. But I'm not sure. I don't think it was possible before, but I'm gonna check on the latest version to double check that.
Okay, so that question comes from Jim. Jim, great job. You've stumped us, and Dustin is gonna circle back and answer that. All right, so I see, by the way, Jeff, thank you for telling me where the other questions were. All right, I see Rakesh. Can we create procedures, functions in Snowflake? Yes. So by procedures, I take it that you mean stored procedures. Stored procedures are relatively new to Snowflake. They didn't have them in prior versions for some time, and I was eagerly awaiting them. So yes, you can make stored procedures and functions. I'm taking it to mean user-defined functions. Yes, you can, and you can even make different types of functions, Java and so on. All right, so I see Dustin is answering the other question. Let me just finish with Rakesh. So Rakesh, yes, you can create both of those in Snowflake. We didn't cover them in this lab, so as a next step for you, it'd be good to explore, the different things that you can create in your databases and the different functionalities. Okay, so that's answered live, right? And yeah, Dustin, thank you. So the answer to the Tableau prep question is yes, you can create a new table. Dustin, can you expand on that just for a few moments?
Sure. Yeah, the link I sent gives some more detail on actually how to do that, but you can create, append, replace data. You can write to an existing table or create a new one, all in prep. So a bunch of different options there as long as you have the permissions. If that makes sense.
Okay, excellent. And there's a question that Jeff answered earlier about, somebody asked about being new to Snowflake and how much training is required to get a general understanding of the program. That also, that depends. I just want to expand on Jeff's answer that this lab is great for, beginners and even more experienced users. That we've all gotten an overview of the UI and how to use it, how to load tables, how to query them, and so on. If you're new to databases in general, then it'll take you a little bit longer to get up to speed versus somebody who has been writing queries for years, or is maybe a DBA, somebody a little more technical. Then it's just a database. It's just that this is in the cloud, and some other concepts are a little bit different in terms of time travel and scaling a warehouse up and down and so on. Underneath, it's just think about it as a database. So even if you're new, I trust that we've gone through this lab at a sufficiently good pace so you were able to follow along with the queries yourself and see them on my screen, and that there was no mismatch, that you were able to understand the concepts and what was happening in real time. And that's for everybody. For whomever wrote that, if you got lost or you are confused about something, go ahead and now's the time to ask. I see another question. Does Snowflake prompt the column names while you write the query? Similar to how Microsoft SQL prompts column names when you know what table you are looking at. Does Snowflake prompt the column names while you write the query? Not sure I'm following.
I think
So
it's
similar, Casper, if you're going to start writing a query, right, and you're going to say you're already connected to a database and a warehouse, and you're going to say select.
Oh, like a kind of like an autofill.
In auto, yeah, exactly. I think that's where
Oh, okay. So if you're in Microsoft SQL Server and you're doing something like this, and you start typing, I don't know, like DBO, and then sorry, like a column name, like, I don't know, fixed trips or something. So will it auto complete for you? No, I don't think Snowflake does that. That's a good feature to request. So let's find a table that I have. Let's see.
Yeah, so this is a similar thing that I've gone through in the past working with Snowflake a lot as well. I understand what you mean. I don't believe there is a way that it auto jumps up on you using the Snowflake UI itself. I have been following to see if it comes through in the future, and I hope it does. But it is you can. Yeah, you can preview it, and there's also a function where you can show columns on a specific database or schema, and you can actually see all of the underlying the metadata that's associated with that as well, just by simply saying show columns. Then it will list all of them for you in the results pane. But for auto filling, it's not the greatest currently. I hope they improve on it in the future.
Okay, good answer. Yeah, if it's something like that, I mean, definitely contact Snowflake with a feature request and get a little claim to fame if they haven't thought about it before and they're like, oh, that's awesome. Okay, next question. Can you do selects across tables in different databases using the owner DB name? So by different databases, are you talking about in our lab, we have city, bike, and weather?
Yeah, I think they're asking, yeah, can we, select all from trips and city bike, join weather from weather within two different databases within one work sheet here?
For sure. So Jeff, thank you for clarifying that for me. So for sure, in fact, in our lab, we did that. We have city bike public trips, and we joined it to our JSON weather data view. So in our context, we were in the weather database. So we didn't have to write the schema and database for that table. We did have to write citybike.public for the database and the schema of the trips table, which was outside of our context. So, I mean, to answer your question, yes. Right now I'm an account admin in my context, and here are all the databases and tables that I can access. So since I can see them in my tree, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to use them all inside one query in one worksheet.
Yeah, it just comes down to access. As long as you in your role that you're using has access to the different databases in which you're trying to select tables from, you'll be able to go across them in a
Yes. Exactly, Jeff.
And so even create a new table, just like any other, schema or warehouse. It's the same thing, as long as you have access behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. So right now, as an account admin in this context, I see 6 databases. What if I change this and I turn myself into a sysadmin? Now I only see 5. So that 6th database that was available to me as an account admin, I could have queried it in that context. Now I've changed my context and it's gone. So I can no longer query it. I can no longer access it. Okay, we've gotten some really good questions. including one that stumped us initially. So Dustin, thank you for tackling that one so quickly. Jeff, thank you for answering the questions live and jumping in with me just now. And again, let's go back here and just again acknowledge the people that have come to make this happen for all of us. So Dustin, that's it for me. I want to thank everybody for joining, and I'm looking forward to everybody joining the Alteryx session tomorrow for day 2, and also Tableau following directly after. And I'll kick it over to you, Dustin.
Sure. Thank you, Kacper, and thank you everyone for joining. We hope to see you tomorrow at 12 for Alteryx and 1 for Tableau Data Visualization Careers, and on Thursday for our main Chart Champ event. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.